So just a little bit on the division-specific criteria. There are some safety regulations specific to working with disabled athletes. They're available on the ICU rules that are downloaded from their website, cheerunion.org. You can also find them on a write-up on our own website, ParaCheer.org, that helps you understand that safety a little better. These aren't all of the criteria. These are just ones that we find are really, really important for people to know. Firstly, wheelchair users must have an added anti-tip on their chair that is touching the floor, preferably at all times, and to prevent them from falling over backwards in their stunts. Or if they don't have an anti-tip because their wheelchair isn't designed for cheerleading or sport, and they're new to the sport and haven't purchased one yet because they're quite pricey, you can have another athlete holding the back of the chair to support the chair from falling over. However, that athlete's sole responsibility is holding that chair. They can't also be counted as a back spot or things like that. So if they're in that supported role, you have to have another individual to count as a spotter.
Yeah. If a wheelchair user does fly a stunt,
yeah. If you're lifting the wheelchair and the wheelchair user at the same time,
then you must have the seat belt attached, so of course they don't fall out.
yeah.
All athletes that have that are spotting or catching or cradling a skill, they must have mobility through their lower body, so they must be able to dip, they must be able to laterally move at speed, and also have at minimum one arm, fully extended arm to catch or spot, and so on.
Yeah.
Release moves and dismounts can be caught by bases that are not the original base. The adaptive abilities divisions go up to advanced or level 4. The kind of throwing people to another base group is typically a level 6 or premier skill. But for the purposes of adaptive abilities, we are allowed to catch cradles not using the original bases.
But only when the original bases are an individual who's incapable of catching the cradle themselves. So if that individual, like myself, can't absorb or move laterally, I could pass it off to another base. So it's not just gauntlets for everyone. It's just this specific adaptation to support a base who can't cradle otherwise.
The next thing, you can use a mobility device to get into a stunt. So can I just demonstrate? Yeah. So for example, to get into like a fill-up for us, I can step onto the bar of the wheelchair here and then assist myself to get up into the stunt. We can climb up the back, keep your brakes on. We can climb up the back.
They can't see what you're climbing. Oh, okay, hello.
Yeah?
Yeah. That wasn't
turn around.
Yeah, so she's stepping on the fee step.
Yeah, onto, not every single wheelchair will have this, but if it's there, use it. The mobility device is counted as the athlete. It is part of the athlete, so therefore we can use it in any way we need to.
Yeah. Okay, so anti-tips, just a bit more information. There are lots of different types available. They need to be able to be, like, it's preferable that they're past the back of the chair, so that the back of the big wheels, so the big wheels don't go over them. You can have a single point at the back or two. I find personally that two has been much more beneficial than having that single point, because on a single point anti-tip you can go over the back corner a lot quicker if you're doing full arounds or more dynamic stunts. But for starting off, a lot of the cheaper basketball chairs and things like that you might be able to get your hands on to do sport with quicker and easier, will only have a single point anti-tip, and that's fine. Just be aware when you're starting dynamic stunts that might be an issue. Catching dismounts. So we'll go over this a little bit more in detail, but as we said, you have to have the lateral speed. You have to have you have to be able to absorb. So I mean, for instance, if an athlete has a lower limb deficiency through birth or through injury, which means that they wear a prosthesis, if it's below the knee, they're very likely to be able to absorb and squat. If it's above the knee, it's less likely to be able to absorb and squat. So that would, like, it doesn't mean that it's not just when they're sitting down. There are other things that might impair an athlete from being able to absorb appropriately, and that's your job as coaches to just kind of see if that athlete is capable and make your decisions. Once classification systems come in, there's probably going to be it'll be easier for everyone to know which one, like what that athlete is going to be capable of doing. We have a specific cradle type called clear-away cradles, which we'll teach you in a moment, which covers that transferring bases and allows a person who can't usually, who's not allowed to catch a cradle, to still be in a stunt where cradles are happening, and have that flyer caught safely. At the end of the day, these safety regulations aren't there because we think it's impossible for a disabled person to participate in this way. We just think it's very unsafe. I've personally caught a cradle. I know how painful that is for me and can be for the athlete. We don't want to create more disabled people through the sport. We just want to support the ones that are already participating. Okay? Base supports.
Yeah. So a base support is kind of almost like an additional base that we have in the adaptive abilities divisions. And it's there to support any of the disabled athletes, and sometimes the non-disabled athletes, to carry out the skill that they may need to do. So they don't have to be a base support throughout the entire routine. They can be a base. They can move from group to group. They're not dedicated to that particular base or to a particular disabled person. They can go and fly if that's what you need to do in the choreography. They're just there as sort of additional help. I mean, we're going to show you some demonstrations with a base support so you can see it more, but essentially they'll come in and assist a wheelchair user or a person who's limb different and so on.
Sometimes it's physical support that a base will need to get a stunt to work for them properly. Sometimes it's to help them get from place to place on the floor. For instance, I can't move, we've done some tests, and currently we see that it's about 5 times slower for me to get from A to B than for a person who's not a seated athlete, because I have to take my brakes off, carpet is hard to move on, things like that. So it might be that a person supports me getting from A to B, but I can do the stunts myself. Or if an athlete has visual impairment, finding their spot on the floor. Or one that I've really enjoyed previously, someone else to remember the routine for you. Well, I had a base support in, I think 2017, my base support was really, really good at remembering the routine. And actually, she just called the stunts. And when the one day she wasn't there, my group had no idea what we were doing. Even though, so yeah, there's all sorts of things that they can help with. And it's their design to make sure that all the people on the floor participating in the sport, in the routine, are part of the team, rather than having a coach at the front or a coach and extra spotters managing certain individuals' needs. We think it's much more valuable to have the people on the team supporting each other, to make it all work, rather than having external people step in and just helping. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Cool.
But do you mix with people who are not have disabilities?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So the adaptabilities divisions are fully inclusive of those with disabilities and without disabilities,
they work together on a team to create to build the best opportunities they can for everyone involved.
Yeah.
Is it like a minimum or maximum?
So at the ICU World Championships, the minimum requirement is 25%. Now that may change in the future as we have more and more athletes joining the sport. But at a regional level, and right now for you to start your teams, just start with one disabled athlete. So start with one disabled athlete in and amongst a group of non-disabled athletes, and start getting out there, showcasing, competing, bringing in additional athletes.
So one's the minimum.
Well, yeah.
If you have 6, start with 6. But if you only have one, don't say you can't come and start a team because there's only one of you. So the percentage is 1% minimum.
Yeah.
Yeah.